So I'm a project lead for a charity called Juvenis, who works with young people in Lambeth affected by violence, crime. And I'm also the founder of a project called Milk and Honey, and I founded Milk and Honey after the death of a young man that I worked with in 2016, because as much as I've worked with boys, there was also a need for me to work with girls because of all the women that were surrounding that young man. Oh, and I forgot, I'm a partnership reference group member for the Violence Reduction Unit, chaired by the Mayor. I always miss that one out.
And so you've been working within your community since you were really young. And I remember the story you told me when we first met, what people used to call you.
I used to be called Councillor of the Block.
Can you say a bit more about what?
So I left home at 15, because what society would say is that I was a naughty child. But what my parents like to say now is that I was misunderstood. And leaving home, it caused a lot of pain. But while I was living alone, I was placed in an 18+ hostel because nobody wanted to take me in. Like, the local authority didn't think that I needed to be housed in the best way. So I was just left in an 18+ hostel. Now, if you do the maths, I'm 15, they're 18. I was quite young. However, I wasn't groomed, I wasn't exploited, I was everybody's keeper. So I became my brother's keeper, basically. And when I say my brothers, I mean the young men who you lot see in the media and will probably open the newspaper and judge, but I looked after them. I held their pain, basically, and that's why they called me Councillor of the Block, because at 15, I was giving advice and helping young men and women who were older than me. I'm talking 20, sometimes 29, and yeah, it's me.
And when we talked, you talked about there were moments in your kind of life so far where people encouraged you and gave you a nudge and support. Can you maybe say about the people that inspired you to do what you do now?
A lot of the people that inspired me, society would say that they're bad people, but I would say again that they was my family. When I went back to education after so long, I had a teacher who, even though I threw a chair at her, she didn't give up on me, She knew that Fridays was my favorite day of the week. And so when she banned me from college, she made me come in on Friday evenings and do my work. And with her doing that, I got a scholarship to London Met to study criminology and youth studies, and I graduated in 2016 with a 2-1. And whilst at uni, in my second year, another teacher who created the gang definition, she used one of my friend's pictures for her PowerPoint presentation. Yeah, it didn't go very well when I saw that. But after seeing that, I kind of explained to her why what she did in hindsight was wrong. And after that day till now, she's the reason basically where I got to inform the Ending Gangs and Youth Violence strategy for 2015, because I was able to speak up in my lesson and speak on behalf of the people who come from areas just like me who may never get the chance to go to uni.
And can you describe what leadership means to you? And I'm thinking back to when we met and you talked about pain, and I guess you've experienced and seen pain on quite a number of levels throughout your...
Yeah, I have, but I'm more than my experience, and I always have to say this to people. I've got a degree, I'm currently studying to be a therapeutic wellbeing practitioner. I work 3 jobs, I live by myself, I pay my council tax on time. And I guess for me, what leadership is me reclaiming my stuff and just turning my pain to power. And that's all I'm trying to do with young people, is help them turn their pain to power.
And you described it to me as a healing process. Can you say a bit more about the healing that you do?
I think for me, it's all about expression. Like, I've grown up in an environment where we couldn't express ourselves, and even when we did express ourselves, we was told that it was wrong in the way that we do it, and the ripple effect is still continuing now. So for me, because I never had the chance to actually express myself in the way I wanted, and I saw a lot of people grow up just like me, go into the system, whether it's the health system and or the prison system, I felt like healing needed to really happen. And it's not until you start getting older, like I said at the beginning, I wasn't exploited or groomed, but it doesn't mean that I didn't go through things. I was more a victim of self, where I put so many other people before me because I needed to, that I never kind of got a chance to heal from my own pain. And because nobody understand how I articulated my pain, it was difficult for me to talk to people. And again, the ripple effect is happening now. So I basically work with young people to do creative expression, which is a way that they can express themselves in a space that's comfortable to them. But again, because a lot of the attention right now is on males, in 2016 I created Milk and Honey, which is a project where young girls come together, because as girls, we're taught to not like each other. Everybody always disagrees, but it's true. And so what Milk and Honey does is allows young women to flourish and put her first, and her is healing, empowerment, and resilience. And whether males want to agree or not, behind every man, there's about 20 strong women, keeping him on the straight and narrow. And it's just the same thing that we see in our communities. But our girls are not spoken about. Our girls are spoken about more as exploited victims rather than powerful young women and women that they will be. So I just enable young people, especially young women, to heal by putting themselves first, really, and using creative expression and kind of not using my personal experience to get them through, but using what they see me doing now. I wouldn't have been able to train as a therapeutic wellbeing practitioner and want to become a qualified counsellor if in 2016 a young man that I worked with didn't pass away. So I guess as I've always done, I owe it to my community for everything.
Thank you. And the work you do is, I think, helping people that you work with exercise their leadership and, as you say, turn pain to power and support that healing process. Can you say a bit about the exercises that you do that help the conditions for people to do that?
Sand trays, Lego, and that's just like with the primary school kids. Music, so we do a lot of music, rap, spoken word, drawing. I recently did a photography expression project with the young girls that I work with, and it's currently in the 100 Heroines exhibition for the Royal Photography Society. It's until July, so please do go and see it, the end of July. So I use a range of different kind of creative measures that young people are in touch with. I'm doing what they want for them, with them, because they are the most important, really.
And you exercising leadership, when we talked about it, we talked about the distinction between authority and leadership. And you've seen people in positions of authority try to solve the problems that you're making significant progress on. Can you maybe describe what makes it different in the way you approach it versus how someone in authority might attempt to approach it?
I don't wear a tie. That's the first thing. Yeah, I don't.
You can take yours off later, though, it's fine.
I'm myself, I think the thing about me that enables me to engage with young people, I'll give an example. I just finished a placement in a primary school. I was only meant to work with 5 kids. I ended up working with the whole class. Not because I wanted to or because I was told to, but because kids, young people, people in general were drawn to those who welcome us and who show us that we are real human beings, I had a young girl in my class tell me, "Oh, your hair is sticking up." I said, "Yeah, thank you, I like it like that." And because I didn't say to her, "Oh, don't tell me that," I replied to her in a way where she felt like this was a human interaction. And I think that's what makes me able to do my job. I'm not saying the tie would restrict me, but we're used to faces of authority dressing in a certain way, speaking in a certain way. If I had just spoken about just my lived experience, none of you would have known that I had a degree. because I'm not dressed in the clothes that I wore to graduation. But the truth of the matter is, whether you've got the qualifications or you don't, or you're in positions of power or you're not, you're still a human being first. And I think having empathy is the most important thing that I've learned over the years.
And I agree, and I think what you described is leadership as an activity, but it's a human endeavour as well, which is, I think, something we're going to kind of thread through the activities for the rest of the day. Can you, as maybe a final summary, describe what leadership is to you and what advice you would give to 400 people in front of you?
I think for me, leadership is unity. If you work in a service, or you work in a community, or you even have a family home, if you're not unified within that, then you can't lead. It doesn't take one person to sail a ship, basically. Leadership is the unity within the community, for me anyways. And I just really hope that you all think about that today, especially in the communities that you've traveled from. Think about what you saw on the way here and the people that you saw on the way here, and the fact that you might not see some of them on the way back, and just be nice to each other and don't judge. That's another thing. Don't judge by what you see in the media or by what you see on YouTube or people talking about topics that they really know nothing about. If you want to help, come into the community. We're here for you.
Thank you. So David, I guess you, as we all have different perceptions and experience of leadership, I'm going to ask you to summarise almost how many years of leadership within the health and care system as a starting point.
So I've worked now for coming up for 42 years in health and care, and my first leadership job I think I got about 40 years ago.
Excellent. And can you maybe just describe what leadership means to you, and maybe the distinguishing factors that we talked about in the morning of authority versus leadership?
Yeah, so if I just say a little bit more about my own leadership journey as well, if I may, Daniel. So I'm currently the chair of Health Education England. I've been the chief executive of the Care Quality Commission, a director general in the Department of Health. I was a director of social services when they existed, manager in a social services department, and a social worker. But the way I got into this, in 1972 I was at school. I was just starting my A-levels, and I started to do voluntary work with single homeless people. And that for me was a real eye-opener, and it made me think about the inequality in society. And it's where my belief in social justice began. And I probably had gone to university. I was the first child to go to grammar school, first to go to university, and so I had no boys to navigate this world in. And I would probably have gone to do geography or economics. But thinking about making a contribution to a more socially just society led me into going to do a degree where I also got my social work qualification. And the point I want to draw out is really about personal purpose. My personal purpose throughout my career has been wanting to make a contribution to a more socially just society. And the opening sentence in my application for the job at CQC was to talk about the golden thread that has run through my career, which is a belief in social justice and a desire to want to make a contribution to a more socially just society. I feel very lucky, very privileged that I've been able to do that through the jobs that I've been able to undertake.
And your journey from frontline practitioner to chief exec of the regulator, can you maybe share some highlights of where you had to dance between authority and leadership, different points?
Yeah, and you do a dance between them. I think that's a good phrase. For me, leadership is the ability to inspire and motivate people to do things that they may not otherwise have done, or to do things that they might not have had the confidence to do themselves do in the first place. I believe it's to enable people to be the best they can be. I think there are different levels to leadership as well. Halima touched on some of this earlier, but I think in the health and care world, I believe there's a practice leadership about what people do when they're actually doing their job. But I think there's service leadership, leading organisations, and then leading systems. And to pick up on a point about leading in communities as well is part of what I mean by leading in systems. And for me, that type of leadership is not about position in the hierarchy, but it is about the ability to influence things and make a difference. Management for me is about setting objectives and developing systems and processes to ensure that things get done. It's often for me about position in a hierarchy. It's about the authority that comes from those positions. It's about situational power. But I don't think it's a binary choice between leadership and management. I think you need both, and I think we make decisions. And if I look at my career, there have been times where I've had to make decisions about doing one or the other in quite a conscious way. I don't think I understood that when I began my career. I think I cringe at the thought of some of the things I probably did as a team leader in a social services department. And I think I've learnt lots and lots of things over the years by getting things wrong. I also think that leadership requires choice as well. I was thinking, if you've got a public health crisis, Ebola, for instance, in Sierra Leone, I think what's required is quite directive top-down leadership. Stuff needs to be done, and it needs to be done quickly. Otherwise, people will die. In a similar way, I think when I first went to CQC was, in my words, broken, and stuff needed to be done quickly. And my own style of leadership then was quite directive, quite top-down. And it needed to be, because I think we needed speedy and clear decision-making. My worry about that, though, is I think it's short-term. I don't think that leads to sustainable change. It rarely leads to change over the longer term. I think for longer-term change, you need a much more collaborative, engaging style of leadership. And I think if I was to pull out one of the key issues that I've learned over the past 30 or so years, it is the importance of engagement, the engagement of people who work in the organisations. I used to think as a director of social services I was good at walking the job, is the jargon, going out and visiting people that worked in the residential care sector, the domiciliary care workers, the people that worked in the community. But I think I was probably on broadcast mode, if I'm being truthful, Daniel. I think I'd gone out to give a message rather than to actively listen to people's experience of working in the organisations that I was responsible for, to ask them what was getting in the way of them being the best they could be. And I think to really actively listen to people, you require emotional intelligence, the ability to see people through their eyes and not through your eyes, and to understand. They talked about empathy. I think empathy and compassion are fundamentally important aspects of leadership. Michael West, I think, is probably the person who's done more to promote this in the health and care world than anybody else. And engagement for me is about giving power away, giving authority away, whether you're doing that in co-creation with people who are using services, or whether you're doing that with people that work in organisations. It's key for me.
And from your experience, being in a position of ultimate power and authority as chief exec of a regulator versus some of the active leadership you described, which one's easier or different?
I don't think one is easier than the other. I think the context we work in as we go into the third decade of the 21st century, the world around me feels much more complicated, uncertain, volatile, much more ambiguity. And I think if I compare that with the world of leadership I began in the late 70s, early 1980s, life seemed much more simple then, much more straightforward. And I think the role of a leader is to simplify complexity, to actually identify what's important. But I think in that world, command and control is dead as a style. I think influence, shaping is key. I think one of the paradoxes that I've experienced is the higher up the hierarchy you go, and I've been in positions of quite considerable influence and power, the paradox is the fewer levers that are actually in my hands and in my hands alone. It's one of the paradoxes of leadership. Theresa May, I thought, gave a really interesting quote last week. I think she was telling Boris Johnson off, actually, but she was actually talking about, I think the phrase she used is being Prime Minister is a public service. It's not a position, just a position of power. And for me, that captures something quite important about the notion of leadership in public service. It's that ability for me to get things done in a complicated environment and to do that collaboratively. So I think the essence of leadership for me in the third decade of the 21st century is really about building teams with a mixture of diverse talents. And by diversity, I mean racial, gender, but also competencies. But probably I don't mean different values. I think it's important that teams have shared values and a shared sense of what they're attempting to achieve. I think, again, on complexity, one of the things that I've had to learn over the years is how you lead teams where you've got highly educated, independent professionals. I'm thinking doctors, social workers, where the role of the leader is to harness that talent, not to control it. And I talked about personal purpose earlier. I do believe, and this is what I learned at CQC more than any other job I've had really, is the importance of harnessing the talent of the people that worked at CQC in a common sense of purpose with a role of the organisation. I thought my job was to motivate people by tapping into their emotional and psychological contract with work. The people that I work with at CQC all wanted to make a difference. They wanted to make a contribution in their way to high quality, safe care for people using health and care services. And my job was not to control that, but to enable that, to tap into their personal purpose and to marry that, theme of the wedding continuing, marry that with the purpose of the organisation. This is why personal purpose aligned with organisational purpose is really a sweet spot, and I feel very privileged to have been in that space. But on complexity and ambiguity, a lot of my jobs over the past 20 years or so have been operating in a political environment, and I mean large P political environment, not just small P political environment, where politics has a tendency to be very short term rather than long term, yet a lot of the things we need to achieve in the public sector and in public service is really about long-term sustainable change. And navigating that political environment is key.
Great. And a final thought from you on what leadership and authority means to you, and any advice you'd give to the 400 people in the room, but also people like Ebinehita. So how do we help more Ebinitas emerge in our communities as well? There's the thing I'm questioning in my head.
I think we enable Ebinehita to carry on doing what she's doing, quite frankly, and I'm not sure a bloke with a tie on is what she's looking for. I spent all weekend in shorts and a t-shirt, if it's any consolation.
No, it helps.
But there's something important. This is my uniform. This is me at work. When I don't have a tie and a shirt on, I'm not at work. And the truth is, leadership is a performance as well. And you know, I bet my underarms are a bit damp, and that's because this provokes my anxiety. You want to do this in a way that inspires you, but I also want to do this in an authentic way, which is genuine, and anybody that sits in front of 400 people and exposes what they think, it's not really a thing that I'd want to do. My Myers-Briggs says I'm an introvert by nature. I've learnt to perform. But for me, leadership is the ability to inspire and motivate people to do things that they might not otherwise do, not have the confidence to do. But we do this with a clear, shared purpose. That alignment of personal purpose and organisational purpose is key, so people can be confident about what they do and can be the best they can be in a complicated environment. Authority for me is about the use of power. It's often invested in a role. It often comes from legislation or a position in a hierarchy. But a bit, as Halima was saying, I do think authority and leadership, they're not indivisible. I think leaders use authority and they use power, and that's a good thing to be done. I go back to the Ebola crisis. You'd want people to make those decisions. I think power and authority is not about whether you've got it. It's about what you do when you've got it and how you deploy it. And I go back to purpose and values. You asked, Daniel, about advice, and I have 4 points. Firstly, be clear about your own personal purpose. It's not the same as be clear why you're doing the job. It's be clear why you're involved in the work that you do. Engage the people that you work with, engage your staff. Build teams that collaborate, and fourthly, look after your own well-being, because at the end of the day, the only resources we've got are ourselves. You take the titles away, the suit and the tie away, and what we've got is our ability, our values, and our sense of purpose.
Great. Thank you both, and I appreciate it's not a comfortable position to be in.